All right, good morning. I'm Mary Leslie, President of the Los Angeles Business Council. On behalf of myself, Nadine Watt, the Chair of the LABC, and Brad Cox, the Chair of the Institute, we welcome you this morning. This is the kickoff of a series of candidate forums we'll be hosting this year and next year. We're thrilled to have such a terrific group of city attorney candidates. We want to thank David Nahai, our moderator, and the vice chair of the LABC for doing this morning. We also want to thank the Waldorf for being our host. They did this 4 years ago for the governor's race, and it was terrific. I also want to thank UCLA. Chancellor Block is with us today. Welcome, Chancellor. And also our sponsors, King and Spalding, for participating today and doing the welcome. Our leadership, of course, has chosen candidates who have proven their ability to garner support and have some name recognition, and are we're eagerly awaiting their thoughts today on the kinds of issues the LABC holds important. We also know that LA is at a crucial inflection point. Right now, we lead in many areas, including clean energy and tourism and trade, but we are facing a series of issues including increasing homelessness, lack of affordable housing, economic and environmental inequities, and some ethical challenges at City Hall. So we're not out of the woods. These candidates will have their hands full, but
ethical challenges.
We think it's super important that we look at these local races, that we get to know the candidates. We know that this is the group that we've chosen this year, and we know that there'll be others joining us next year. The key issues for the LABC really are these issues of affordable housing, homelessness, and economic issues. Today, the candidates will address them. We also get to know them a little bit about who they are as people and what kind of leadership qualities they're going to bring to the table to be effective and transparent. In advance of these forums, I hope that many of you were able to see the Homelessness Survey we released in partnership with the LA Times over the last several weeks. This really spoke to what voters in LA think are the priorities. Consistent with our 2019 poll, LA County voters overwhelmingly, 94%, felt homelessness is a serious or very serious issue. The survey also indicated the voters believe that this right to shelter is important and overwhelmingly supported it, and that a continuum of housing from transitional to permanent supportive housing is critical. Voters' patience is at an all-time low. They would like action proportional to the problem now. That was really crystal clear and very different than our 2019 poll. If you haven't seen the results of that, please go to our website at www.labusinesscouncil.org and take a look at it. It's really interesting. Also, for those of you who would like to submit a question today to any of the candidates, there are cards on the table. Please use those. Rachel and Adam will be collecting them, so just raise your hand. Here's Rachel in the back and Adam in the back. They're waving. Write your questions. They'll come pick them up, and they'll give them to our moderator, David Nahai. I'd also like to thank King and Spalding, who will be providing the welcome remarks today. Joining us is Peter Strauss. Peter is the founding and managing partner of the firm's LA office. Welcome. He is focused on trial and global disputes. We have a few of those in Los Angeles. Over 30 years, he has been litigating tort, product liability, and commercial matters, and he has first chaired dozens of trials in courts throughout California and the US. So without further ado, Peter.
thanks for that warm welcome, Mary. I really appreciate it. And good morning, everybody. As Mary said, I'm a trial lawyer, so I have promised both Mary and Dina that I've whittled down my remarks to a tight 57 minutes. Now, seriously, let me get started. First, Mary, I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank the Los Angeles Business Council for reaching out to us to partner with you to co-host this important candidate forum today. Now, most of you probably know King & Spalding, but for those of you who don't, I'm just going to say a couple of words. We're a Global 50 international law firm. I moved down from San Francisco 10 years ago to open the LA office for King & Spalding, and I persuaded the leadership of King & Spalding, frankly, to open the office here because of the dynamic legal market and dynamic economy that LA has. It has one of the largest GDPs all by itself in the world. It has the largest superior court system in the country, the largest district court system in the country, and is one of the most active places to practice. And as Mary said, we love to try cases here. The firm was founded back in 1885, and we are growing rapidly. When I came down, it was just me and 2 associates, and we're now nearly 70 lawyers with 6 bright new young lawyers coming next year. So couldn't be more delighted to be here. When Mary and her LABC team came to us to co-host this candidate forum, it was kind of a natural fit for us, and for me in particular, because I see the dynamic potential that LA has. Sure, it has big problems, but it also has big solutions and big people here to solve those problems. The LABC has had a very positive impact on business and the region's policies for more than 80 years now. Its mission of working together to solve problems and build partnerships within the business community and government is even more important today than it ever has been. All of us here, all of us are invested in improving the economy, our quality of life, and the future for people in the region, as well as the millions of people that visit LA every single year. The next city attorney will impact how we enforce and prosecute laws involving housing, homelessness, public safety, and other areas that affect every Angelino. This citywide position, it writes every municipal law, it advises the mayor, city council, and city departments, and commission and defends the city in litigation. It brings lawsuits on behalf of the people, and it prosecutes misdemeanor crimes. The decisions made by the city attorney office impact every aspect of life in Los Angeles. And that will be the first part of our forum. The second part of our forum is going to involve the council member for Council District 5. And the next council member from District 5 will also have a notable impact. I really feel that we are at an inflection point here in our city on how the city legislates for public safety, housing, transportation, as well as how it prepares for major events like the World Cup and the Olympics, which are coming soon. The choices Angelinos make in these races will have an impact for many, many years to come. And we wholeheartedly support this open and frank discussion that this forum provides for us. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator today, David Nahai. He is LABC's vice chairman and incoming chairman. In addition to leading his own consulting firm, David Nahai Consulting, for many years, he has served as an important business and community leader, which are keys to a sustainable future: energy efficiency, water, real estate, and land use. David has served as the chairman of the California Regional Water Board, general manager and CEO of the LADWP, president of LADWP's Board of Commissioners, and senior advisor to the Clinton Climate Initiative. Without doubt, the candidates and all of us here are going to benefit greatly from the expertise and community leadership that David brings in moderating this forum this morning. So welcome, David, and thank you.
Thank you. I'm supposed to, okay. We decided that we would communicate by hand signals so that this could go on. Thank you so much, Peter. That was very kind. And mostly true. So, my name is David Nahai, and I'm truly privileged to be your moderator for 2 debates today. First, the city attorney's race, and then the candidacy for the city council for the 5th district, where LABC is located. Let me start by thanking the LABC team, Mary Leslie, of course, like to acknowledge again our chair, Nadine Watt, our chair of LABC Institute, Brad Cox, but really, truly thanks to Adam Lane, to Rachel Levy, to Harris Rosenblum, and to Ariel Lopez, who's actually the most important person in the room today because she will hold up cards telling us how we're doing on time. So I'd like also to acknowledge two members of the Regional Water Board who are here, Irma Munoz, former chair, and Jim Stahl. Thank you both for being here. You're all dignitaries, but we serve on the regional board together, so I have to acknowledge them and thank them. Politics being what it is. So, all right. Well, let's get started. So, I think the candidates here, you know them all, but immediately to my left is Hydee, Feldstein, Soto, Kevin James, Marina Torres, and Teddy Kapur. And I've asked them to sit in this way, so first by really alphabetical by first names, and I will ask them to respond to questions, in this format. So a disclosure first and some ground rules. So I want you all to know that I've known and supported some of the candidates we're going to be talking to today, but I'm here solely in my capacity as a vice chair of LABC. The questions have been prepared by LABC, not by me. And even though the candidates have been told the general subject areas that we're going to be covering, they have not been told the specific questions that I'm going to be asking them. The subject areas, that we will be covering are homelessness, public safety, environmental justice, and corruption. So those are the four areas we're going to be covering. So here are the rules, and I'd ask the candidates please to listen carefully. I will first pose an introductory question to you. You will each have 2.5 minutes to answer that question. Following that question, I will pose a question on each of the subject areas I've just referred to, and you will each have 2 minutes to respond to that question. At the end of the session, there will be a final question, and you will each have 1 minute to respond to that question. It's very important that you abide by the time regulations, right? Because we're tight on time, and we want to be fair to everybody. If you go over your allotted time, and Ariel will be showing us this, I'll cut you off. Okay, so that's our agreement, right? You're all lawyers, so rather than have Peter's 57 minutes per question, you've got 2.
Or 1.
Or 1, yes. And I would ask the audience, please, no clapping, no expressions of approval or disapproval. It'll just detract from the decorum of the event, and also it'll waste time. Okay, so we're going to go with our first question, and for this one you have 2.5 minutes each, and this is the question: what was the one formative experience in your life that has led you to run for this position today? Hydee, you go first. 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the LABC for including me, and for, is that better? If I take my hair away from the microphone, that'll work. Anyway, thank you very much. It's really my pleasure to be here. I did not expect that question, but that's okay. The answer is simple. I'm Hydee Feldstein Soto, and I'm running for this office for an LA that works. The Feldstein comes from my father, and my father was a New York Jew. The Soto comes from my mother, and she is a third-generation Puerto Rican Catholic. And when they got married in 1954, that was a very big deal. And they stayed married for 66 years. I don't think they spent more than 3 nights apart. My father passed away March 20th, 2020, and I remember the date very well because it was 5 days into lockdown. And when he passed, I was holding his hand. And after he passed, his death was news. It was on the front page of El Vocero, which is the largest Spanish language paper in Puerto Rico. It was in the Caribbean Business Journal. It was in the Orange County Register. My father was a big deal. He was a corporate lawyer by day and a do-gooder by night. And he was not a household name. His law firm was Feldstein, Helpi Hernandez y Gotay. And after he retired at the age of 70 in California, he continued to do good works and good deeds for his community. If you read the news reports on him, he shut down a prison in Puerto Rico that was a torture chamber for prisoners as young as 15. And if you read the news reports on him, he would represent people for free. And he had one client, Don Felix, who would bring a roasted pig to his Jewish lawyer's office at Christmas time, okay, in payment, because Don Felix couldn't afford to pay Dad. And as I watched and I read about my father's life, and I'm very proud of my professional qualifications, I'm not diminishing them, but I realized I wasn't living up to my legacy. So I decided to run for an office where I could give back.
Thank you.
I'm listening to
Well,
the time.
that was good. That was very good. Thanks for that. Kevin,
You
would
might
you look
hold
at?
them up a little bit. I wouldn't have noticed.
Okay, two and a half minutes.
Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. I'm Kevin James. I'm the former president of the Board of Public Works in the City of Los Angeles, the former director of the Mayor's Office of Film and Television Production, and the former chief of legislative affairs in the City of Los Angeles. And I want to thank LABC for all the great work that you do in the city and around the region, but most importantly, for having this first forum in the city attorney's race in 2022. David, this is the answer to your question on the one issue. When I realized in city government that the city attorney's office is the most important office on the ballot when it comes to homelessness, that's when I decided to run for this seat. Why is it the most important office on the ballot? Because all the issues around homelessness are being decided in the courts. In the courts. And the city attorney is the charter authorized liaison to the courts. I'm running to bring a different legal approach and strategy to solve homelessness and affordable housing. I came here in 1988 looking for a community that was willing to accept me for who I was at the time. An openly gay young man just starting my legal career in the 80s, in the early days of the AIDS epidemic. Coming from a part of the country in Texas and Oklahoma where discrimination against us was not only legal, it was encouraged, and of course, all in the name of public health. I found that community in Los Angeles, and I love this city for that. I started my career practicing law at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher. Then I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office as an assistant U.S. attorney. I then went back to private practice. My 33-year career, 2/3 private practice, 1/3 public service as a trial lawyer and a litigator, and at the same time, I was able to be in leadership at AIDS Project Los Angeles throughout the 90s. APLA at the time was the second largest AIDS service organization in the world. And here I am with you this morning, having led Public Works, the second largest department in the second largest city in America, through exciting advancements in infrastructure, environmental leadership, worker protection and promotion, and finally, as a person on the 12-member Emergency Operations Board when the uncertainty and darkness of COVID struck us. What I love about LABC is that you know that when we work together, we can solve these problems that today seem insurmountable.
Okay. So, thank you. Thank you, Ariel. All right, Marina, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right? All right, good morning. My name is Marina Torres, and I'm running for LA City Attorney. I am currently a federal prosecutor here in Los Angeles. I don't want to scare anyone by saying that, but I typically handle cases of corruption, money laundering, and cartels. I've been a prosecutor for a long time. It's been the honor of a lifetime. But prior to that, I was in the Obama administration where I worked on immigration policy. And that obviously is something very important to me because I am the child of formerly undocumented immigrants from Mexico. So the ability to work on DACA and Dreamer policy was an incredible honor to help people whose families were very much like my own. But as in the over 20 years or so of legal experience that I've had, I will say that I never thought I was going to be a prosecutor. It was my own family's experience with the criminal justice system that showed me how prosecutors were trained, actively trained, to remove empathy and from their prosecution. And with that, I became a prosecutor. And I have loved being able to bring a prosecutorial approach to these cases that's full of empathy, and one that's with constructive prosecution, with intelligent prosecution, we can keep people safe. And right now, more than ever, that's a concern of a lot of people living in Los Angeles and a lot of businesses trying to just simply function here in the city. But I doubt that I would have ever run for city attorney, quite frankly, had it not been for the FBI raid at the city attorney's office in July of 2019. As you know, it was my office that led that raid. But you have to understand what Los Angeles means for somebody like myself. It's a city that my family left their country for. It's a city that I left the White House for. And it's a city that I believe in. And on that day when we saw the FBI coming in with their flak jackets and their handcuffs and their guns and leave with boxes and boxes of evidence of criminal activity, that's when I knew I had to be a part of the solution, that I had to be a part of cleaning this up. Because that's what Los Angeles means to me. It's still a city that's full of promise. Because when I see the city, I don't just see encampments, I see possibilities. And my goal is to be nothing less than your advocate, your voice, and your attorney as your next city attorney.
Thank you. Thank you. That was pretty much right on time. All right. Teddy, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the Los Angeles Business Council for hosting this forum. This is a pivotal time in our city. Your question was the transformative experience that led us to run. And for me, it's through the perspective of homelessness. For over 25 years, I've dedicated my personal time and resources to helping those who don't have a place to live. Today, I'm the chair of the board of a nonprofit called Imagine LA. We mentor formerly homeless families. I've been a mentor and going on my 4th year as the chair of the board. As a lawyer, I've helped businesses when they fall on hard times and try to save jobs. As an educator at the Los Angeles City College, I teach young adults the job search strategies to help them pursue new fulfilling careers. We see that the status quo is broken. We see it in the smash and grab robberies. We see it in the corruption at DWP. We see it in the human suffering in our neighborhoods. And I believe that I bring these unique perspectives to address these crises, to help better address the homeless challenge, expand housing opportunities, improve business in Los Angeles, to make it a better place to do business and a better place for young people to pursue promising careers.
Thank you. All right, with that, we're going to move now into the specific questions on the subject areas. And the first, many of you have mentioned homelessness and housing. So this is a two-part question that I'm going to put to you. So as you heard earlier, the LABC Institute's recent homelessness poll showed that Angelenos are frustrated with the lack of progress on addressing homelessness and the removal of encampments. 94% of voters view homelessness as a serious or a very serious problem, and 57% believe that officials should focus on immediate, short-term solutions. Another 30% believe that long-term solutions should be pursued. But the same poll showed a strong majority of 3/4 of people believe that a right to housing or shelter should be a guaranteed basic human right. So here is the two-part question. How do you plan to address the problems that homeless encampments create for both the people living there and the surrounding community without criminalizing homelessness and while staying within the boundaries of the Mitchell and Boise decisions and cases on homelessness? And the second part of the question is there a role the city attorney's office can play to make housing production faster, more efficient, and cost-effective? Hydee, we go first?
Sure.
2 minutes.
Thank you. On the question of homelessness, we have to start with the fact that we've been building housing at a cost of $2,000 to $3,000 per square foot. Those of you in the real estate industry will understand how outrageous that is. And that is what our Triple H money has been hung up on. So I've actually looked at what can the city attorney effectively do, not litigation over the next 5 years, but right here, right now, to create shelter. Number one, the financing structure that we're using is outdated. It is a CRA structure that funds housing with a 20% mezzanine strip, 20% of the cost of construction. It makes it very difficult to find the equity when the tax credits are no longer worth as much as they were, and it makes it very difficult to find senior debt that will sit on top of sovereign mezzanine debt. Number two, we have to enforce the competitive bidding procedures of the city charter. Open this up so that it isn't simply a situation, the construction costs are always competitive, but the site review and the consulting contracts and the design, those are mostly sole source, and that adds a lot of the cost. Number three, we have to streamline the process. We have to have one office where people can go with plans that encompasses building and safety, planning, fire department inspections, everything under the sun, so that we can build expeditiously and we can create the kind of housing that people need. Number four, we need to find mental health services and addiction dollars. Those currently rest at the county level, and we are in litigation with the county. That is all a problem. At the end of the day, we need to enforce. We can't criminalize poverty or homelessness, but neither can we normalize criminal behavior. And no one has the right to privatize our public spaces for their own use, whether it's housing or anything else. Where does it stop? If I have a small house, do I get to spill out onto the sidewalk in front of me for bulky items? No, that's not right either.
Thank you.
Got cut
Thanks
off.
very much. See, it's easy with Hydee because I'm right next to her. I can go like this, you know.
And I had lots more to say.
I'm sure. So Kevin will go next for 2 minutes. So
Yes.
two-part question, addressing homelessness and expediting the building of housing.
Okay.
What can the city attorney do?
The city attorney, again, is the most important role when it comes to doing this. Everyone now knows the city of Los Angeles cannot solve this problem on its own, but we have not had the partners that we need in the region. The city attorney's office can bring, and I will bring, a regional solution to homelessness. It's the only office in City Hall that can do it. The mayor can't do it because he doesn't have jurisdiction to force the other municipalities to do anything. The city council the same way. But how does the city attorney's office do it? Through the courts. And we don't have to go sue the other cities. All we have to do is defend the existing litigation against the city right now. When we settle one of these cases, we're tying our hands and creating this jigsaw puzzle of pieces that don't fit together on the way that our neighbors are managing the public right-of-way versus the way that we do it. People, other cities, other communities have not stepped up. For example, no offense to the Waldorf Astoria, but go home and Google Beverly Hills and homeless shelter and tell me what comes up. The city attorney office has the ability, by defending the cases that are brought against us now, because a court ruling like the Boise case that you mentioned, Boise, actually out of Idaho, mandated the way that we cleared Echo Park Lake and Venice Beach because of the ruling that came from the Ninth Circuit. That's what we need when it comes to property that obstructs the public right-of-way. Boise doesn't manage that. We need that case here in Los Angeles. It can exist today in the LA Alliance case or in the existing Garcia case, but we need to finish the case to a court ruling so it applies to everyone in the county. Same issue similarly, David, regarding affordable housing. Quite frankly, we need to build public housing again. We also need to simplify the financing structure. And we also need to, there are zoning issues that we need to review and streamlining the permitting process. One of the things the city attorney's office can do, I know because I'm a former department guy, is work with departments on a review of all the processes and the bureaucracy that exists to simplify it for the departments.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Marina?
All right. Well, I just want to start off by saying that I am so frustrated. I share the sentiments of everybody, 95% of people, I don't know who these other 5% are, but 95% of people living in Los Angeles, when I say I'm incredibly frustrated at the situation. I used to live, I obviously work in downtown, and I moved out of downtown. Like so many people I know, like so many businesses that I know. We're not just at a pivot point. I think we're at a critical inflection point where what we do now is going to shape LA for generations to come. And homelessness is really at the crux of it. I think we have frankly more than enough shelter options right now. If we look at campgrounds, if we look at motel and hotel options, if we look at short-term shelter options, we can actually treat this problem, this issue, as the emergency that it is. But it's been a lack of political courage, quite frankly, from our electeds to do so. And the problem has just been shoved off for years and years. When these housing construction projects are going to be done in a couple years, and they're coming at the cost of $500,000 to $700,000 a unit without services, Detroit has been able to solve this for $20,000 a unit, and it includes services. So we need to have innovative solutions, and we need to have, as Kevin mentioned, partners in City Hall to do that. And then once that's done, we need to talk about enforcement. Because right now what we have is simply untenable. It's a human tragedy just unfolding in the streets. It's not the city that we all deserve to live in, where you have homeless encampments right next to schools, where you have rampant drug use right next to your work, next to the federal courthouse. People shouldn't be afraid to live and work and conduct their business in the city of LA. That's not what my parents came here for. That's not what people are paying these high taxes and high costs of living for. And I intend to bring about a solution as city attorney.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Ariel, for holding up the cards so that they can see it as well
I can
as
see
me.
it from me.
I can't really see her, so.
Very helpful.
Okay.
You can tell by her body language that it's time. Teddy, for 2 minutes, please.
Sure. It is staggering, the human suffering, and it's heartbreaking. 50,000 people that are unhoused in our city. On average, 5 people die every day. The life expectancy is 30 years shorter for the unhoused population than the general population. I would start by declaring a state of emergency in our city. Just like with the tornadoes in Kentucky and hurricanes, the city attorney has the ability to declare a state of emergency, then insist on more resources from the state and county, federal government to address this urgent crisis. The city attorney also can help expedite the production and approvals of housing, and we need to be creative with our solutions. We're waiting too long to build a single family unit for each person. And we've seen that the acuity needs of people that are on the street that our organization works with on a regular basis varies greatly, right? The emancipated foster youth has a very different need than the person suffering from mental health. And our housing options should respond to those needs of the individuals. We need to know who is on the streets, and then some people can do well in the tiny homes idea where you have 10 by 10 units and it's a temporary housing. They get 3 meals a day, they get social services, and can then thrive on their feet. But other people need to be in other types of facilities, and we need to be creative with those solutions. The city attorney should lead on those efforts. So many people, we need to also hold the county more accountable to providing mental health services and drug treatment service to people on the streets. There are innovative programs in that way too. A group called Healthcare in Action, sponsored by the SCAN Health Plan and LA Care, are getting Medicare and Medicaid funding to treat people that are on our streets. Street medicine would solve so much of these needs. So a combination of prioritizing housing, prioritizing services, and being creative with our solutions through leadership from the city attorney's office.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, we're going to move on to the next subject area, which is public safety. Issues of public safety have become an increasing concern due to drastic changes in crime trends. In Los Angeles, homicides, shootings, and car thefts have spiked. Recently, a string of looting, theft, and burglaries of high-end stores across the state have occurred, amplifying public safety concerns. There are a range of theories about the spike in crime. Some want to increase penalties for certain crimes and augment police funding. Others want to reallocate resources to programs that provide community support and address the root causes of criminal behavior. Specifically, where do you stand on this question? What are your thoughts on why we're seeing this drastic change in crime trends, and what are the best ways to tackle the rising crime, and what can and should the city attorney do? Hydee, for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I always get to go first, so I don't get to riff on anybody else. Being very brief, there have to be consequences for criminal behavior. I mean, it's that simple to me. Whether you're talking about someone who's a first-time offender, who you may want to put into a diversion program, or who you may want to put into some community service or educational or job training program, or whether you're talking about a serial burglary. It doesn't matter that the property stolen was worth $9, $90, or $900, okay? That all falls under a misdemeanor. And whether it's a smash and grab of a jewelry store or it's an assault on a person, that also doesn't matter. But the criminal act remains the same, whether the bauble taken off my neck is really an expensive piece of jewelry or is costume jewelry that is cheaper. The motivation of the attacker is the same, and the need for intervention and for consequences to the behavior. That doesn't mean incarceration in every instance. I don't want to take the pendulum all the way back to where what we were doing was simply incarcerating people for long stretches of time, and we can't change things like Prop 47. They are a statewide constitutional amendment. So we have to work within the time frame and within what we have. And what I will tell you is that at least my office would impose consequences in every instance, whether it's a hate crime, whether it's theft. If the DA will not prosecute as a felony, we will need to step in and administer the criminal justice system with diversion, job training, incarceration, but some kind of consequence. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, please.
Thank you, David. 3 elements for me to cover here. First of all, on the criminal side, I'm a former federal prosecutor, so I have experience working with consequences for illegal activity. I also have worked inside City Hall on what is similar to the diversion program process. It was called the Evolve Entertainment Fund. I mentioned that I was the director of the Mayor's Office of Film and Television Production. What the Evolve Entertainment Fund, it wasn't a diversion program, it was a jobs and apprenticeship program. But we saw that folks really wanted the opportunity to move into perhaps a union card. So on the prosecution side, one of the things that also concerns me significantly is that LAPD will tell you, whether they've heard it from the city attorney's office or the mayor's office or someone else in city government, that LAPD is being told, don't bring A, B, C, D, E, and F crimes to our office. That's going to be a different message when I'm city attorney. I'll tell the LAPD, you're the experts on the street. Bring every citation, every offense that you see in the public right-of-way in our neighborhoods and our communities that you think we need to know about. Our office can decide collectively with the community and with the victims whether or not we charge on that case. But what we can do is get the data from it. The data is incredibly valuable. You learn that in public works. You can see where you have repeat and habitual offenders. You can see where you see a pattern or hotspots. So that's why I want the data from LAPD. We can decide collectively how we charge it. And then my diversion program will be a diversion to jobs pipeline that will go beyond just a certificate, but to the partners with the labor organizations that have endorsed me in this race to provide a union card in this instance. So thank you.
Thank you.
I will share that I've lived the full range of the experience in the criminal justice system. I always tell folks that my first visit to a prison was not as a prosecutor, but actually to visit my brother, who was charged as an adult despite being a juvenile and having no interaction with the criminal justice system. And he has 2 strikes because of it. And that's going to be something that follows him for the rest of his legal career since he's on his way to be an attorney. But as a prosecutor as well, I can't tell you the number of times that I've had to console victims of crime, that I've had to console business owners who are thinking about leaving Los Angeles because they just can't simply make it anymore. They're just tired of feeling like their government and their law enforcement isn't looking out for them. As a federal prosecutor for many years, I have been on the front line of this. Just the other day, we announced the results of our 2-year-long investigation. We led a takedown here in Skid Row, and it led to an arrest of about 50 people, 50 drug traffickers that were preying on homeless individuals on Skid Row. We took almost 900 pounds of methamphetamine off the street and over 46,000 pills of fentanyl. When we talk about enforcement, I have done it, and I think it needs to absolutely be a priority of the next city attorney's office and the next city attorney who holds that position. And frankly, I think for a long time, we have had people that are just politicians at the head of that office. We need a true litigator. We need people that have been on the front lines, people that have taken on these cases and taken them to trial, because that individual is going to be aggressive when it comes to public safety and looking out for all of us. Because I want this to be the LA that I know it can be and what it has been in the past. And with your help, I think we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I talk to business owners, and so often someone will shoplift, and they instruct their employees not to stop anybody when they steal something, and they call the police, and there's lack of response, and then charges aren't filed, and cases aren't prosecuted. I've talked to neighbors, and even 2 weeks ago in Hancock Park, a mother in her stroller was robbed, and her purse was stolen while she was walking her stroller in her driveway. There are a lot of people are definitely very scared, and so I think fear among the community. Business owners don't feel like they can do business, and you've seen so many leave San Francisco. It hurts the morale of employees who feel like they're working at probably lower wages, and they see somebody can just come and take something and not be held accountable. We need to have accountability, and so we need to certainly understand and prosecute these cases and be told of those cases so we can have them reported to make sure that everyone feels safer in our neighborhoods and our communities, so that residents stay, businesses come and thrive, and we have a place for Los Angeles that everyone can thrive.
Thank you. All right, the next area is environmental justice. So the connection between environmental degradation and inequality is absolutely clear. More and more research has linked race as the best predictor of whether an individual lives near pollution. People of color are more likely than white people to live alongside power plants, oil refineries, landfills, and other polluting industrial infrastructure. The city attorney can have an increased role in redressing these issues. Currently, the Environmental Justice and Protection Unit within the City Attorney's Office specializes in pursuing both criminal and civil actions to enforce environmental protections. What do you see as the role of the City Attorney in prosecuting environmental crimes and enforcing environmental protections, particularly for underserved communities that have borne the brunt of environmental degradation in the past? 2 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, our zip codes should not be a bigger factor than our genetic codes and our health, and yet that is what the recent study shows. It is, in fact, the zip codes near pollution, and they are primarily communities of color. Our city attorney's role, as well as the role of the district attorney, as well as the role of the U.S. attorney, has all too often been retrospective. It has been enforcement after the fact. So when there's a spill, then the lawyers have come in to basically, with law enforcement, prosecute with respect to the spill. There has been insufficient attention paid to prevention, to partnering with folks in the industry, to partnering with landowners, to having consequences reach back for the petroleum leases that underlie our city and that aren't attended to, whether by, I think it's the Archdiocese, who is the largest landowner of any of these oil sites, by the operators, or by the city that licenses them. The fact that Jefferson Park has been struggling for a decade and has been unable to get 21 oil wells handled, the fact that the recent Pico oil spill that occurred over the weekend has been minimized and reported with the wrong address. The smell in Carson, the offshore leaks, these are all after the fact events. So I would work with the city attorney's office to partner with the petroleum administrator and to partner with business and government and labor to see what we can do in advance to prevent harm rather than retrospectively coming back and prosecuting.
Thank you.
Thank you. I neglected to mention earlier my website's Kevin James for City Attorney, FOR, kevinjamesforcityattorney.com. I mention that now because under Ideas for City Attorney, ideas number 1 and number 2, you will see my priority for increasing resources, expanding resources for the Environmental Protection Unit and prosecutions for environmental offenses, both in the criminal division, in the criminal branch, and civilly as well. It's a very important issue for our city and something that I was very pleased to have had the opportunity to work on at the Board of Public Works. Our portfolio was expanded specifically for this purpose. The decision was made by the mayor and the city council both, as well as the environmental advocacy community and neighborhood community groups, to bring 3 significant offices in this area to the Board of Public Works so that we could incubate them ourselves and then they could be turned in to their own independent departments. The Petroleum Administrator, Erica Blyther, I was happy to sit on the committee when she was hired. I also was responsible on the committee for hiring our original Petroleum Administrator, Uduak Intuk, who was taken by the state because of his expertise. The Petroleum Administration Office was designed for the problem that Hydee was talking about, and she's right about this. We needed to be proactive in the city. What sparked it, quite frankly, was the Aliso Canyon gas leak, the need for the recreation of this office. The second office that we are incubating at Public Works that came in during my leadership is the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office. It is an office specifically, again, we hired Marta Segura to handle that office, working with the environmental advocacy community to look at every environmental policy in the city through a lens of equity. And finally, our city forest officer, because the urban canopy has not been distributed in the way that it should be, and that office was created to be incubated as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
For me, this fight is personal because I grew up in one of those communities where there was no environmental justice. My mother died of breast cancer at a ridiculously young age at 46. And not from any genetic issues, but from the environmental factors that had existed in our community for far, far too long. And so for me, this issue is reflected in my core values. And I think, as folks have said before, we absolutely need to be more proactive. But right now, our current city attorney's office is not even being sufficiently reactive. We need to be incredibly much more aggressive because these are issues fundamentally of justice and of access to courts, to access to litigation and to results. If I were to be city attorney, this would be such a personal priority for me because if folks do not have justice in environmental issues, it affects your entire life. It affects where your kids go to school. It affects how long you're going to live. It affects how many generations you're going to be able to pass on your education and your knowledge and your access. And right now, our city attorney's office is just simply not doing enough. We're passing a lot of those cases over to my office federally. And so we can prosecute them federally, and we do, but frankly, we can't do the job of 2 offices, and nor should we, right? Because the city attorney's office is supposed to be the office for the people. And under my jurisdiction, under my governance, that's what we're going to get at the city attorney's office. Thank you.
Thank you.
This issue is an example of how the status quo is broken. Over 3 years ago, the City Council passed an oil well inspection ordinance, and still today, it hasn't been approved. The city attorney hasn't written it, and it hasn't gone through the processes to go into effect. We inspect restaurants. You get an A, B, or C rating. But we don't inspect oil wells that are in all of our neighborhoods, hundreds of them. It's long overdue. We saw an oil spill last weekend, the West Pico oil site. I've written letters to the city and the authorities to try to get inspections and get that well and others more proactively inspected so that we don't have these hazards that occur in our neighborhoods. The industry tells us there are protection measures and safety measures that oil spills can't happen, and that was proved inaccurate in this case and probably in so many others. So we need to be more proactive, and the city attorney can play a leading role, and I would make it a priority in our office.
Thank you. All right, next, and let me remind you, if you have questions, please do jot them down on cards, and they'll be picked up. We have one of it. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the next subject area, which I think Mary referred to as ethical challenges in the city. That's a very euphemistic way of putting it. Our city is reeling from multiple corruption cases involving bribery, racketeering, and conspiracy charges against former and current elected and other city leaders, including a major LADWP scandal, which I can tell you the 10,000 decent women and men at LADWP are so demoralized by, because it's so unfair for them to be tainted with that brush. But we have a number of local elected leaders and even entire departments involved in serious corruption cases. How do you see this? Do you see this just as a number of bad actors out there? Or is this a systemic issue within the city of Los Angeles? And if so, what steps do you plan to take to reform the system to ensure that this kind of behavior doesn't occur in the future? 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think Ethical Challenges is probably the award for understatement for 2022. Thank you for that. From my perspective, it's both. There are bad actors. I don't think that the general manager of the LADWP's acceptance of $1 million job plus a Mercedes-Benz in exchange for shepherding through a $30 million no-bid contract is endemic. Okay, that's a little too brazen for me to believe that that's affected all of City Hall. By the same token, there are systematic problems that need to be addressed. When I speak to elected officials about enforcing the competitive bidding procedures, I get this nonsense of, oh, it takes too long and it's too hard to write an RFP. I am willing to bet you that almost every human being in this room has participated in a beauty contest, okay? We all know what that's like. And there isn't a significant corporation in America that doesn't take on an RFP or a competitive bidding process when it's about to spend a chunk of change. I promise you that I've run these processes and I've participated in them. They can be done quickly, cost effectively, and they can be done with pre-qualification if that's what it takes. But if we do competitive bidding the way the city charter intended, rather than letting the exception swallow the rule, we will cut off that particular avenue for corruption. My office would have zero tolerance, I mean zero, for undue patronage, corruption, or no-bid contracts. It is something that I've been yelling about forever. The city attorney's office is a little bit hampered by the fact that we don't have investigatory subpoenas. We can't build housing. We can't pass laws. But we can draft clearly and consistently. We can look to the controller's office for a public data portal that will make information available. We can respond to Public Records Act requests, and we can enforce the provisions of the city charter fairly and equally so that everyone in business has a chance to bid. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin?
Thank you, David. On day one of my campaign at kevinjamesforcityattorney.com, in the Ideas for City Attorney, I published very detailed solutions to problems that have been systemic in our city. And I propose what I call our anti-corruption task force. This involves partners, sometimes you have to call in a favor, with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the District Attorney's Office, the State Attorney General's Office, and partners from our academic institutions as well. And of course, I have relationships at all of them, adding our Controller's Office too. In 2012 and 2013, those of you that were paying attention to civic life, almost everybody here in this room, of course, may remember that I was a candidate in that race for mayor of Los Angeles. One of the things that I focused on in the many debates that we had, 42 of them in the primary, 6 of them televised, was corruption. The press, including the Los Angeles Times, called me alarmist. Even in the endorsement of Eric Garcetti, they said I was at my best when I dropped the talk of corruption. They said I saw corruption around every corner. Well, time did tell, and unfortunately, I was right. Hydee's right too when she says that the problem is both that David posed in the question. There are individual outliers that we have seen, but there's also a system that for some reason has bred this feeling that you can get away with this in Los Angeles. That's why, to Marina's credit and mine both, it'll make a difference when you have a former federal prosecutor stepping into the city attorney's office. I will say this, that at the Department of Public Works, when you look around the country and you look for graft, oftentimes, and you don't have to go farther than San Francisco, Public Works is in it. You didn't see that in the city of Los Angeles in our administration, and you won't see it going forward in the city attorney's office either. You'll see something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Well, I'll start off by giving the standard disclaimer that I'm obviously here not as an official representative of the Department of Justice, although I really wish I was. As somebody who has actually handled corruption cases, I can tell you that public corruption is an especially insidious crime because it frays at the trust that we have in our institutions. It frays at the trust that we have in government. I can tell you that I've had to dismiss cases because there are victims and witnesses that just don't believe the government anymore. They just don't believe we can do anything. They just don't trust us anymore. And that's incredibly problematic because if you don't have trust from your people, from your folks, you're not going to be able to have a functioning government. You're just not. And so as city attorney, having come straight from the halls of the Department of Justice, I'd have an absolute zero tolerance. I would have an open door policy with our federal and state and local law enforcement partners. I've had several commendations from several law enforcement agencies, FBI, LAPD, Secret Service, DEA, and I can tell you that I would absolutely utilize those close relationships with law enforcement to weed out what I think is especially entrenched in LA city politics. So to answer your question, I do think it's very entrenched. I don't think we've seen the end of it, which is unfortunate for all of us living in Los Angeles, but I think we're getting close to putting an end to it and to rooting it all out.
Thank you. Teddy, please.
Yes, I do think that it's systemic, and we can make changes in City Hall to reduce and end these corruption issues. First, the City Council has too much discretion on projects. City Council members are able to approve or disapprove, and so that's been tied to a lot of these corruption scandals. We should have the Planning and Land Use Department make these decisions, have them at an administrative level, have greater transparency in the decision-making and approval processes so that we can have a better system in place to, I think, change the incentives for corruption. We also have to have more oversight. And the bodies that enforce and investigate these complaints shouldn't be appointed by the mayor. They should be appointed by an independent body and be independently funded and have greater independence in their investigation and how we hold these corruption allegations. Take them seriously and hold people accountable.
Thank you. Thanks very much. All right, so we're going to move on to our final question. And let me say this, it's a standard interview question, you know, what do you think your weaknesses are? And the answer is always, oh, I work too hard, oh, I care too much, right? I don't want to hear that kind of answer, right? I do not, all right? This is where I want to see absolute honesty, right? Imagine you're talking to your therapist. So, I'd like each of you to give one example of a failure in your career. A failure that you regret, what you learned from it. 1 minute. Who wants to go first? Hydee?
I'm trying not to sound arrogant without false modesty. I just don't know what to tell you. When you have something that looks like it's headed toward a failure, one of the things that you have to do is step back and change course. Okay, so as I think about my life and my career and what I've learned from experience, okay, I am hard pressed to find a failure. I'm not a litigator, so there's not a win and loss in court. I've if transactions that I've worked on have failed to close, it's rarely been the lawyer's fault. When a client says jump, I usually say how high. And if it's not illegal, immoral, or fattening, it's my job to get the job done, okay? We have all had things that we wish we could go back and do differently. And I understand it's a standard interview question. I suppose that my biggest failure was actually toward my son. I've spent too many billable hours at work and not enough time at home, and that may sound like a nonsense answer. I don't mean it to.
No,
That's my biggest regret.
All right. We have to stop. Look, if somebody asked me that question, I'd say I need about a day to list all of my failures in life. But Kevin, for 1 minute.
No, thank you. I feel the same, David. There are so many areas of my career where I can focus, but I've been asked this before, of course, and I come back to the same issue about being honest to myself and the public about who I am and who I was. More specifically, when I started law school in 1985 in Houston, Texas, I was an out gay man. I mentioned that earlier. But when I started searching for jobs, I went back into the closet. I went back into the closet and was dishonest at that time to employers about who I was. I did it out of fear. I didn't do it out of courage, obviously. The courageous thing to do would have been to stay and do something about it, but instead, I went and hid. And that, I think, is part of the reason that I stepped in as early as I could into the world of aid service organizations, because so many of my friends were dying in those years. That I was embarrassed about what I'd done and ashamed of it.
Okay. Thank you for that. Marina.
When I was younger, I had absolutely no interest in immigration work or in criminal work. I like to joke that I actually took evidence pass-fail in law school because, with my family's undocumented status and people going in and out of prison in my family, I already had enough of that in my personal life. I had absolutely no interest in doing that. And so I spent about 6 years in the private sector, frankly, providing a sound financial footing for my immigrant family. But if I can say I'd regret something, it'd probably be not realizing sooner that that's really my passion, right? Is really channeling my own personal experience and making others stronger, because of my experiences in the immigration field and in the criminal work, I've helped empower people. I've developed this ability to fight and to not stand by in the face of injustice. And I only wish that I had discovered that myself a little bit earlier in my career.
Thank you. Ted?
Yeah, this is a difficult question, so I appreciate all of your answers and how difficult it is. I think your question also poses what's the challenge we face today? And so I'm not going to talk about professional failures. Some of those are privileged, but I think that one thing I'm always afraid of failing on is balancing all of this. Right? It's a difficult campaign. I've got a 22-month-old daughter, a 10-year-old son, my wife. I'm still a partner in my law firm, and so just the fear of failure and trying to juggle all that every day and balance it, to make sure you're doing your best in each realm and giving everybody the attention they need and in every job and every duty that you have.
All right. Thank you. How much time do we have for Q&A? About 5 minutes? Okay. All right. So I'm going to, we're basically going to go, 1 minute each, just very, very quick on this. And not everybody has to answer if you don't want to. So the first question is, what are your thoughts on SB 262 and no-cost bail and its effects on current crime in LA? Who wants to go first? Go.
I'm happy to say that on the substantive policy, I would trust the experts in the office and the lawyers who know more about criminal justice than I do. What I will say is that I think that coming into office day one and doing sweeping changes without talking to your own staff and your own deputies is not the way I would handle the job. When people ask me what would I do day one, is nothing. I'd find out where the bathroom is, and I'd talk to the people in the office to learn what the job entails.
Did
No.
SB 262?
Well, thank you. Let me just talk about bail issue in the city. It's in the question in the city attorney's office. Everyone here knows the city attorney's office prosecutes just misdemeanors. So most of the cases that we have are not going to be cases that we seek bail on. The bail issue, though, was significantly affected, and the press doesn't pick up on this as fairly as they should, by COVID, quite frankly, and much of the action was taken by the presiding judge in the Superior Court. In the city of Los Angeles, there will be some instances where as city attorney, I will seek bail. Cases that involve public safety, a DUI arrest, a domestic violence arrest where we have a victim that's potentially in danger, maybe even a minor, and a hate crimes arrest even in the same circumstance. What we will not have happen is a circumstance where someone is being held on bail that could be a longer period of time than they would actually serve for the offense that they have been charged with. And that's a complaint that I've heard over and over again a bit from the community that has existed in the system prior to COVID.
Okay.
I believe in a pretrial detention system where we can keep dangerous people, away from the public for a bit. I mean, and where people aren't incarcerated just because they can't afford bail. What we have right now in the federal system is a system that I frankly promote. People are held once a judge determines that that individual is either a danger to society or a flight risk. Bail and cash has nothing to do with it, but that individual is able to be removed from community for a bit while the case is being processed. That's a system that I support because I think it balances the economic issues, which frankly should never be a part of that consideration at all, and it also manages to keep the community safe.
Okay. Teddy, did you have something to say on that? Or?
I just, I would reiterate that misdemeanor prosecutions that we do in the city attorney's office, most of them are petty theft, and so we wouldn't, I think, need to have a pretrial detention and bail system. But we also need to have the ability to do so if there are egregious crimes and circumstances.
Okay, I think the question was more about whether philosophically, you support no-cost bail, or the system where people who are able to put up money get bail, and those who cannot, because of their poverty, have to spend their time in jail. But let's move on. Next question, do you support a new tax on real estate in Los Angeles to fund more homeless housing?
Not at a cost of $2,000 to $3,000 a square foot. That's really easy. I mean, if it's coupled with a plan and it's coupled with the right structure to bring the cost down, that's great. But to throw more money at the problem when we can't possibly build our way out of this at the current cost, the answer is no.
Okay.
I think we're always going to be looking for resources to solve this crisis, whether it's housing and services, mental health services, addiction services, job placement services. Right now, though, the government doesn't have a lot of credibility, as we've talked a bit briefly, with the costs around Prop HHH as well as Prop H at the county level. So curious to see where the voters would come in on this. That said, stepping in to be an advocate for solving the problem regionally, then I would, as city attorney, and the work that we need to do together, yes, I would support it. And I would be an advocate for it because I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot cheaper than the way that we're spending money now by not providing these services, the cost to society and such. So I would support it, but with a very strong oversight system. We've talked about that before. We haven't succeeded there before.
Absolutely not. We've already spent $1.2 billion on this homeless problem issue, and homelessness actually has gone up 43%. The answer is not money. It's political courage and ability to really bring effective solutions forward, to think outside the box, to not think like a politician, but think as a problem solver and someone that's actually going to solve the issue. And we don't get out of it by throwing more money at the problem.
Teddy?
I would oppose new taxes. We've already approved and asked the voters to approve tax measures. They did so. The money hasn't been well spent. We can better spend the resources that we have and coordinate with other county and state, federal resources to solve this problem.
Okay. I'll ask this one last question and then we're going to have to wrap up. How will you use your experience and the power of the city attorney's office to clear a path for a zero carbon Los Angeles?
You want me to start?
Sure.
Oh, you want to?
I was just going to, no, go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead.
All right. Look, if you look at the Green New Deal and our targets, the featured targets in the city of Los Angeles, those are all 4 things that we've had some level of responsibility for at the Department of Public Works. Electrification, we've had great success towards electrification through our Bureau of Street Lighting. Our urban canopy, I had the opportunity to talk about that with our city forest officer and the goals we have for equity around our urban canopy. 400,000 new green jobs. We work through that every day with our Bureau of Engineering. And diversion. We work through our LA Sanitation and Environmental Department, which in many ways is the Environmental Protection Department for the City of Los Angeles in partnership with the DWP on reaching very strict diversion goals that come from the state. So I would continue in partnership with the agencies that exist in the city to accelerate them. And by the way, one of the things that's critically important, we can all talk about what our priorities are, but to get to your priorities, you have to have experience and know how to do the budget process in Los Angeles. It's a major municipality, obviously. Whether you like it or not, it is a game. When you pull from one, when you get something from over here, you have to take from over there. And that is a process that you need to be very good at to have success in city government to get to your priorities.
Okay. Does anybody else want to answer?
I'll just chime in real briefly. I'm incredibly proud of the way LA is leading in terms of sustainability and bringing green jobs to the city, because quite frankly, the greener that we are as a city, it's not just good for those of us living there. As a citizen of LA, I appreciate that, but it's also good for business. It's also good for jobs. It's also good for keeping people here in Los Angeles. And again, I'll go back to enforcement. It all comes back to whether businesses and people feel comfortable that a city attorney is going to actually enforce the laws and ordinances that are currently there. So as city attorney, this would be obviously really a priority and a personal issue, because I think we really can achieve environmental justice here in Los Angeles and make it the leading green city that it should be.
Okay.
If I
really
can
quick,
just-
because we have to stop.
You need to draft ordinances that are enforceable, not just ordinances that sound good. And you need to have a city attorney's office that then is committed to partnering with policymakers in a way that's effective. Okay. Right now, they're making statements and throwing spaghetti at a wall as viral hashtags. We
I would
need something that
emphasize trying to
works.
accelerate the solar adoption that the city has in its plan, and also try to expand connected bike lanes throughout the city to make it more environmentally friendly.
All right. Okay, thank you. We need to stop, so let's have a round of applause for the candidate.
And we should all applaud David for a job well done keeping us on track.
Thank you, Hydee. Thanks very much.